Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Career Propeller channel. My name is Jonathan, and it's a pleasure to have you all here watching today, and a pleasure also to welcome Emily Knights from MVF Global. Emily, hello.
Hello, good morning.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you, and really appreciate you giving up your time to talk to us today. I know we've spoken before on the phone about what you do at MVF and your sort of career so far, and I know that there'll be some really good hints and tips for candidates that we'll talk about today. So let's sort of kick off straight away and ask you about your career, how you got started, and how you sort of ended up as head of talent at MVF Global.
So I had a bit of an eclectic start. I graduated in 2008, which wasn't a great year. I did a master's at the University of Sheffield, which is where I did my undergrad, and then I worked part-time in resident support services. So when my master's finished, I took on a role there permanently, and it was a very good job to start off with. It taught me lots of transferable skills, but it was very strange having to kind of do disciplinary meetings with freshers when I was only like 23, 24 myself.
Yeah.
So I did that a couple of years. And then I joined the Boots Retail Unlimited graduate scheme. And the main thinking behind that was that I wanted to work for a kind of commercial business and really get that exposure to kind of P&L management and sort of running a store where you have a lot of commercial responsibility.
Yeah.
And then I did that for about 3 years and moved into agency recruitment. So I worked at Michael Page in the retail team there. Had a couple of promotions, managed a team, and then after a few years, decided that I wanted to make the move in-house, which is where I found myself at MVF. Joining as a talent partner responsible for our contact centre and publishing teams. And then after a couple of years was promoted into the talent manager role where I manage a team responsible for all of our emerging talent roles.
That's great. And it's interesting that you sort of took the Boots route and then going to Michael Page. And I was talking to someone recently who we were sort of thinking about the experience you get with a big company. And a lot of people start out with smaller firms, but actually going on to a sort of a graduate scheme, I guess you learn quite a lot about different roles and also about business and profit and loss and all those sorts of things. Do you think that's given you a good sort of foundation for what you've gone on to do?
Definitely, and I think with Boots in particular, I had a really good experience. Like I can't fault it. I think their graduate scheme is really good because you get so much exposure, and people find it interesting that you're a graduate there and kind of seek your advice and your perspective because you'll see things when you haven't been a retailer all your life in a completely different way. And that was one of the really important things that I was thinking about when wanting to join a more kind of commercial business, was a company where I had the opportunity to kind of be taught things, but also be involved in lots of different elements of that business.
Yeah.
So I always think whenever you're looking at kind of a role in a graduate scheme in particular, it's really worth doing your research about what you're actually going to be doing, because different companies do grad schemes in completely different ways. And also as well, like at MVF, we don't have like a formal grad scheme, but we hire a lot of graduates. Whereas actually the approach we take through our training and like our academies is very similar to a grad scheme. We just don't call it by that name. So I always think it's worth asking those questions about that development at the early stages to see if it's going to be the right thing for you.
Yeah. No, that's good advice. And in terms of sort of working at Michael Page, the person I spoke to recently had also been in that business, and so I think those companies have been around for a long time. They've grown to a large size, and whilst you may not get that sort of entrepreneurial edge potentially that you might get with a very small company, they have tried and tested methods and methodologies and ways of doing things. And of course, you're backed up by a big brand as well, and all of the resources in terms of monetary and also people. That it actually gives you especially for recruitment, it gives you a really good grounding in the skills, and of course you get exposure to lots of candidates, so you get to sort of learn as you go through. Was there an element of training at Michael Page as well? Was there a period of doing that, or were you sort of straight into recruiting there?
I say it's a bit of a mixture of both, actually, which I really enjoyed. So first of all, like the colleagues that you work with are exceptional. Like there are some people at Michael Page that are kind of industry leaders in terms of
Yeah.
recruitment skills. Um, and if you're lucky enough to work on a team with those people, you get to, you know, listen into their phone calls, they'll help you, they'll coach you. Also across the wider business, you know, Michael Page works with a lot of big corporates. So if someone has got a job on in one particular area, there might be the opportunity for you to work on something too. So I'd probably say it is a bit of a sort of baptism of fire. And I was really encouraged, you know, to just get on the phone, start talking to people, because you'll learn a lot from that approach rather than formal training. But on the flip side of that, they then also do schedule quite a lot of time for training. So whether it's like days away from your desk to learn the basics, as well as that kind of constant coaching. And it is really full on. Like, don't get me wrong, like some people I think find it really tough because you're in an environment where you have a lot of targets to hit and they're very complex. You're not just doing one thing, you're doing about 15 different things and you have to be hitting the metrics in all of those areas.
Yeah.
I didn't find it too much of a change because in retail, when you've got like your different MI metrics and you're working towards different areas in your store, you're quite used to looking at your scores and going, actually, how am I performing? So for me, it wasn't a massive jump. But I know some of my colleagues who maybe, you know, were coming straight from university or maybe worked in a company where there weren't any KPIs. This was like a complete shock to them.
Yeah.
But I quite like it. I like, you know, the looking at, you know, your 15 numbers and being like, yeah, 12 of them, I've done a really good job last week. I quite like that. I get quite energized by that. But I know that some people absolutely hate it.
Yeah.
But it does feel like you said there's this kind of proven way of working. And, you know, they know if you hit these metrics, when you fast forward a month or 6 weeks down the line, you're going to be hitting your kind of bonus targets in your numbers. So you can't really argue against it. You just sort of have to do it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think exactly right, is that they've done it so over so many years, and they've tried, I guess, you know, they've honed their sort of methods and all the KPIs. So they know that if you do the number of calls and the number of CV sends and, you know, CV send to interview ratio and all that sort of thing that you would probably track, that if you do all those things and you hit those KPIs, then you will make your targets and then get your bonuses. So I think it's a really good grounding. I think, you know, I guess there are lots of startups out there, but I think, and that's great. I mean, that's great experience as well. You're probably much more sort of learning as you go there, but going into a big company and perhaps onto a graduate scheme, if you can do that, just gives you that sort of professional outlook. And I think taking that onto another business just means you're already there in terms of the things you'll probably need to do. Did you find going from, you know, a big, huge company like Michael Page to MVF, which I know is growing very quickly, but perhaps not of the same size yet. What were the things you sort of took from Michael Page into that role, and how did that help you?
That's a really good question. I think there were a few different things to kind of take, really. So I can remember always being told that like the main difference between agency and in-house was basically if you were in an agency and things weren't working out, you could just avoid the calls and, you know, you could buy yourself time to fix the problem. Whereas when you go in-house, obviously when the person's working in the same building as you, and you might bump into them in the kitchen or, you know, see them when you're out for lunch, it can be quite kind of full on. However, I would say at Michael Page, the team that I was in and the people that I always worked for really wanted us to provide kind of good service to our clients. So we were always encouraged to, you know, have those difficult conversations, face into anything that was going wrong, because ultimately that's how you kind of build the relationship. And I think that really helped me, because then when it was in-house and things were taking a little bit longer, my approach of going, well, I'll update you with everything that I have. I'll have all my metrics so I can talk you through like the pipeline and the problems, actually was really helpful. And I don't know whether that's something that all agencies and all kind of recruiters would do. And I also think as well, some of it was just the real kind of recruitment basics. So sometimes I was working with managers that had never ever hired before. And this could be a real challenge, because I think everybody has an idea in their head of what they want a candidate to be when they start a recruitment process. And that can be sort of wrong in a number of ways. So it might be that you're wanting someone with loads of experience, but you haven't got the budget to pay for it. It could be that you want a particular skill set, but actually that is incredibly niche, and there's maybe only 10 people in London that can do what you're looking for. Whereas I would say that influencing skill that you learn as part of an agency or kind of recruiter is really important, because then you have to go and have that conversation with somebody to say, I know you want someone that's got 5 years experience, your budget can pay for 2, but doing it in the right kind of way. And I think that's where, for me, what Michael Page has really set me up to do is to have some of those kind of difficult conversations with people. Because ultimately, if you're having to convince clients that have never worked with you before to start working with you, that is a lot harder than saying to someone internally who's all on the same team and ultimately wants the same thing for MVF to be really successful. It's an easier conversation to kind of have. So I sometimes think that baptism of fire actually really helps you, because then when you move to another organisation, you've had harder conversations in your previous job, so it doesn't feel as scary. And the people at MVF are great, and they really want to do the right thing, run a good process, have a great experience. It's just about teaching them some of the ways of kind of doing that, and how we can work together as a team to get it done as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Okay. And with MVF Global, could you sort of give us a bit of background on that, on the company and what it does, and your role there?
Yeah, of course. So MVF is a MarTech business. We're just over 10 years old. And what we do is we help our clients find new customers through our marketing expertise and our proprietary technology.
Yeah, and how does that work in practice? So so if you take on a new client, then you sort of feed leads to them, or how does that actually work?
So we generate all of the leads ourselves. So we have a number of websites which we direct traffic to. And then on those websites, we've created content to kind of educate and inform customers about the benefits of a particular product or service. And then what they'll do is go onto a landing page and input their details. And this allows us to qualify the lead. So say you're a business owner that wants a fuel card for your business, say.
Yeah.
On that landing page, we might ask like your name, your business name, where you're based, how many fuel cards you're looking for, when you're looking for them to start, those kind of questions. So what that means is we're only sending that lead through to clients that can provide what you're looking for. So the benefit for the client is they're only getting more leads, and the benefit for kind of the user or the customer is you're only going to get callbacks from people that can provide what you're actually looking for. So rather than phoning 10 or 15 companies and hoping they can provide you with what you want, we make sure that you're only getting callbacks from people that actually can.
Okay, that's interesting. And so would you work with one client on a campaign, or would you say does a lead go out to several companies at the same time, or does it vary?
It really depends. We ultimately want to make sure that what we're providing is useful for kind of the client and the user. So if I've got really, really niche requirements on a particular product or service, and we only have one client that can match that, we would only send it to that one client, because there's no benefit for anybody if we're sending it to people that can't provide what that person's looking for.
Yeah.
So it really does just kind of depend on the specifics. And we have so many different clients kind of globally that have so many different products. It can be very niche, or it can be very broad. So I'd probably say if you imagine yourself as a user, or if we were both users, our experience of MVF could be quite different. If I was wanting something really niche, I might get one phone call, whereas if you were looking for something maybe a bit broader, or a product or service that we have more clients for, you might get, say, 4 or 5 callback from clients that can provide what you're looking for. So it's kind of very bespoke, because we really want to work on a kind of quality model rather than, because I think sometimes lead generation can have a bit of a bad reputation, especially before the GDPR days when it was a little bit like the Wild West. And everybody's been there when you get that, phone call saying, have you been in an accident, or have we missold PPI? We've all been there. And I'd probably say MVF is as far away from that as you possibly can imagine. So when GDPR came in a few years ago, we didn't really have to do anything because we were already kind of living and breathing best practice because we were focusing on quality. Whereas I know a lot of other kind of lead gen businesses were absolutely petrified because they were going to have to change everything that they were doing because they weren't focused on that model.
Yeah.
Whereas for us, because quality is really important, and has been, I guess, really the main focus from the start, it's not been a big change for us.
Okay, and it's an interesting sort of business in itself, in terms of, I guess, it's content-led marketing. So you've got writers, people who would write articles and create content and that sort of thing. Lead magnets, do you use that sort of thing as well? So to draw people in, or is it just based around content, as in written content and video content and that sort of thing?
It's more sort of written content and video content. We do also do some kind of campaign and backlink work, but generally what we want to do is to create content that people want to read. And there's something that's been said at MVF for a little while that I think is kind of quite wholesome, but is actually kind of really getting down to what we want to do, which is to kind of create work that your mum would be proud of. Because there's been a thing in the past where, you know, some of our especially like advertising, everybody's kind of seen it, where it's that real kind of like clickbait, and that's where we kind of said, well, you know, we don't necessarily want to just do clickbait for the sake of it being clickbait. Whereas I think some of the companies aren't as focused on that, and then people click through and get a bit of a surprise about what they're actually getting. So we've always kind of focused more on that quality rather than just getting clicks through for the sake of clicks, really.
Okay. And as talent manager, I guess you've already alluded to the fact you have quite a lot of different skills you need to bring into the business. Do you hire writers on a permanent basis, or are they sort of freelance? And how does that sort of play out with the other roles that you would recruit for?
Definitely. Well, we have a real kind of wide range of positions, especially in kind of the emerging talent role, which is where I sit. So the majority of roles that we hire across MVF are permanent positions. We do sometimes have kind of contractors and freelancers that will support our work, but that is really quite a small part of what we do. We have also had kind of casual workers as well that will support our contact centre. So with some of our leads, we also telephone qualify them. And what that will mean is that there's somebody who's calling up the person who submitted the form to double check the details. Now, with that part of our business, there are kind of peaks and troughs throughout the week, the month, the quarter, the year, where actually a casual worker model has been more successful for us. And also as well, from a talent perspective, it's kind of opened a whole other world of talent to us. Because we've hired a lot of people that have their own businesses and they ultimately just want to supplement their income by working, you know, a couple of shifts a week. We've had people that are studying, who find that, you know, that kind of typical job throughout uni or throughout college can sort of supplement people's income without it being a full-time commitment. So actually for us, it's been kind of a win-win, because we've hired people that we wouldn't have been able to consider before. And we found that it's been able to, or we've been able rather to sort of match the needs of the business with those peaks and troughs throughout the year. So it is a really, really kind of wide range. We've also started hiring our first apprentices, which has been relatively new to MVF. So we hired a couple of people at the beginning of the year, and that's something we want to kind of continue doing, because for us, we're looking for that kind of more diverse talent rather than us sort of hiring the typical profile that we've always hired. We're really looking for ways to I guess look at the people that we're hiring, not just in terms of like kind of culture fit, but culture add, to make sure that we're really hiring the right people for MVF, and they might look and sound and be people that we wouldn't have maybe considered even a few years ago.
Okay. And have you had to sort of take a different approach to your hiring to find those people? Or was it just a case of looking for longer until you find those people?
I think that's a really good question. And I think for me, the biggest challenge was around hiring managers, because it's really easy to hire in your own image. And we were in a position where We were set up by 5 friends, all of whom were white males. So we didn't get the best start in terms of diversity. And I think some of the initial hiring that we did was done in a very typical startup way. If you hire people that you know, you hire friends of friends. And typically that's often very similar people, because people often are friends with people that are like them. So I think especially some of the kind of leadership of our business was very samey. And I'm sure if you spoke to any startup of our age, I'm sure that everybody kind of has the same challenge, because everybody's kind of hired in their image. And I'd probably say when I first joined MVF about, 3 years ago now, typically a lot of that screening out happened at sort of CV stage. And conversations were had around, oh, it's got to be Russell Group uni, or, what's the point? And I actually think that, there's been a lot of work that we've kind of done as a talent team and a people team, especially to really challenge that. So first of all, I'd say if you look at kind of our people team, we're quite a diverse bunch. We haven't all come from Russell Group universities. We didn't all go to private school. We're quite kind of varied. And I think, first of all, by not coming from that background yourself, you can really challenge it, because when someone says it's got to be this, it's quite powerful to say, well, I'm not that, and I'm here. So if I'm here, why can't we look at someone that's more like me? I'd say actually, as a business, it's been really kind of quite refreshing, because those conversations didn't have to happen very much before people started to realise that it was the right thing to do. First of all, because it is the right thing to do, but second of all, that there was kind of a real commercial impact. So we would hire people that didn't fit that initial kind of private school educated, Russell Group or Oxbridge background, and those people kind of were real trailblazers for it. So I don't think it's just the hiring. I think it's when you give those people the opportunity, most people come in and absolutely smash it. And the more people that you have that aren't like that group that do that, the more willing hiring managers are to look at it. And I think that's where now we're really seeing the benefit of that by, looking at things like apprentices, which I don't think, right at the beginning businesses would have considered, because it would have been seen as a bit risky. We've never done it before. We don't know if it's going to work. Like in the early days of a startup, you have to be really focused on the commercials, and you want to do what is going to work. Whereas now I think we're sort of sometimes taking more risks with talent. And the reason why we can do that is because we've built really good recruitment processes, that we know that if we've got someone that comes from a background that isn't like the typical or the old-fashioned background at MVF, that if we put them through the process and they perform really well, then we know that that person's a lot more likely to do a good job for us, because they've demonstrated the MVF values, the skills, and kind of any technical expertise that's required. So it's almost like kind of ignoring a lot of what's on the CV and getting people in the position to I guess see them in action. And I think that's where the talent team's really pivotal to that, because you will put through more people that have on paper different experience. We'll then do the initial kind of phone screen and ask a number of questions around kind of values and experience, then share that with the hiring team, or share your recommendation with the hiring team. And I think when you're looking at that kind of shortlist and it becomes more varied, that then hiring managers are pleasantly surprised. Because I think they, when you don't live and breathe talent, which is essentially what my job is, and you follow the trends and you see what other people are doing, like, if you're a publishing director, you're not going to have time to do that. So ultimately it's the job, or my opinion, it's the job of talent to kind of educate some of our stakeholders about that and how we can do things differently. Because I think long gone are the days of talent teams just being kind of like CV farmers, going and getting applications and then saying to a hiring manager, do you want to interview this person? Cool, I'll book it in. We want to do a final, cool, I'll book that in too. Oh, great, here's the offer. At MVF especially, it's far more kind of consultative. So we're asked our opinion a lot more, because our stakeholders value it, because they know that we're kind of experts in our field. For me, it's been kind of really refreshing, because I know some people, when you move internally, it can be more of that popping adverts up, screening CVs, walking a candidate through a process, and that being your job, almost administrative. And that's not a bad thing if that's what you like doing. Whereas for me, it's that kind of influencing and optimizing processes that I really love. And at MVF, I've been given the opportunity to do that, and my team have delivered that. And it's been a really kind of exciting kind of transition around what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I think it must be quite freeing, because, as you say, historically it has been that role of CV farmer, internal and external, where you're trying to find a very specific profile. But what I always enjoyed in recruitment was seeing someone who was a bit of an outlier, and you could see in their CV that they had maybe had transferable skills, or there was just something, you get an instinct about someone. And it was always a bit frustrating if you knew they could do the role, but it didn't sort of match up on paper with what the client was saying. It was quite annoying. So it must be quite freeing to be able to sort of think outside the box. I hate that term, but to not be sort of hemmed in by a very specific thing, as you say, a 2-1 from a red brick university, 3 A's at A level, that sort of thing, and coming from a similar, maybe a small list of companies that you might hire from, but being able to look at people and you think, yeah, there's definitely something here, and I know I've got the authority to sort of go and do a bit of exploration and ask those questions.
Definitely.
And
Definitely.
it's quite rewarding as well to sort of have spotted someone like that and bring them into the business and see them thrive. Must be great.
Is, and I loved it when I was at kind of Michael Page, because I worked in what we called specialist retail. So that would be things like healthcare, welfare to work. And actually those more traditional retailers have got so many transferable skill sets in those areas.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so that I used to love that, of having a conversation with someone that maybe had been like an area manager in like a food business, and then saying, actually, you've got so many transferable skills to go and work in like an optician's, because actually, although like compliance is very different around like selling food and selling glasses, it's a lot of the same transferable skills. And that's something I've always loved, like seeing people that I placed like 5 years ago into like an area manager role in a healthcare business, and seeing them kind of progress and go up the kind of food chain is so rewarding. Because when I was talking to them about opticians, they'd be like, what? I've never worked with glasses. I've never worked with healthcare. I don't understand it. I don't really get it. And then saying, but no, if you look at your background, you've got all of those transferable skills. So I always love doing it. So I think I've kind of borrowed some of those kind of influencing skills from getting people to do completely different things. So then transferring it over at MVF.
Yeah, that's good. And also, I think you've sort of alluded to sort of diversity and inclusion and building more diverse teams, people from different backgrounds. And what's good, I think what's been happening over the last, I guess, 10 years really, is even the bigger, I mean, typically I used to recruit into the management consulting market, and, we had a very, very stringent set of things we were looking for. And that's changing now in those businesses. So in the Big Four, for example, a degree isn't really the be all and end all. They want people from different backgrounds, because what they're realizing is that their own clients are becoming more diverse. And so what will happen if you go another 10, 15 years down the line, they'll just have a very similar set of people who won't relate to the people that are within their clients. And we know that more diverse boards, more diverse businesses perform better. They're more productive, they make more money, they make better decisions, and all that sort of thing. So it just makes sense. And it's good to hear that there are companies such as MVF who are sort of embracing that and giving you the freedom to sort of go and find people who, you might not have hired 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, for us, it's a journey. And I think we're all aware that we're kind of we're not at the beginning, we're not starting from scratch, but it's nowhere near finished. So this year we, I guess we kind of created a number of networks that kind of happened organically. It wasn't a top-down kind of conversation at all. But we set up our women's network, and then our LGBTQ plus network, and then our network, which is our lived experience of ethnic people. And actually, it's great to have those networks there from people that are all across the business at all different levels, doing completely different jobs. constantly kind of asking the question about how we make MVF a more inclusive place to work where people feel that they can belong.
Yeah.
Also how we can question some of the assumptions that are being made, because we've done kind of conscious inclusion training, and I can't remember what the percentage of the company that's been through it, but it is really high. And this was something that we wanted to do because everybody has biases. Like, we just have to be honest and open about that. Like, I have my own biases that I sometimes have to kind of check, because if you don't, you can end up just getting really kind of set in your ways. And I think that's where what we wanted to do was encourage people to just reflect on times when they felt like they haven't belonged, and then realise that some of the behaviour that they were exhibiting meant that other people felt like they didn't belong. And this was probably completely unconscious. And, you know, we at MVF, we're lucky. I'd say it is an environment where everybody is trying their best to be inclusive. But ultimately, you don't know what you don't know. So if we're not having those difficult conversations, you're never going to learn. And it's been quite refreshing when we've done some kind of events with our networks and people have sort of asked questions or made comments that kind of prove the point of that event. And what we've really encouraged is that MVF is kind of a safe place to talk about these things. So if you don't know how to have that conversation, and if you don't have a friend or a relative or somebody that's like that you can't ask that question to, quite a few people within our networks have said, you know, ask me, I don't mind. If you don't know how to approach this topic, ask me and I'll tell you how I feel about it. And then you probably need to go and have the same conversation with 2 or 3 other people, because I'm not the person who knows everything. So it's more about opening that kind of dialogue. And I think that's where, for me, the hiring and that inclusivity has to go together. Because if we hired people that weren't like the kind of traditional MVF employee and we didn't do anything else, odds are they're going to join us and they're not going to feel like they belong there. And that's just the worst thing for everybody involved. It's the worst thing for that person joining a company where they feel like that. That's really, really bad. It's also, from a kind of commercial perspective, a waste of everybody's time hiring and recruiting for this position, because we're going to have to do it again, because that person that doesn't feel like they belong is going to leave and we're going to be back where we started. And I think that's, for me, around creating that culture where people can be themselves at work. And it sounds like such a cliche, I think, sometimes. And it can be really difficult to kind of pin it down. And like I said, I don't think the journey is over, but we're doing a lot of work to try and make it as good as it can be now, knowing that we're kind of constantly optimizing and looking at how we move things forward.
Yeah.
It is a journey. I don't think any company is ever going to complete it, and it's never going to be over. It's always going to adapt and change. And I think that's what's great about MVF, is we're always looking to kind of innovate and then iterate what we're doing. So all these conversations that we've been having over the last few years will continue to happen and will still be going on in the future. Because I think if you are happy with what you're doing today, odds are, like, within, like you said, a few years, you're going to be out of date. So it's constantly on everybody's kind of agenda and making sure that we're doing what we should be doing now, but also thinking about what we should be doing for the future.
Yes. Okay. And your role as talent manager, I guess you could be called recruitment manager, but I think, to me, talent is more strategic in that you're working with it. I know recruitment, sometimes recruitment is, you mentioned sort of earlier, they're like order takers, they're sort of CV farmers, but talent is more strategic in terms of you're probably more engaged with the business, where the business is going, what the business objectives are, and then looking sort of quite far forward as to, well, what are the skills we might need in the business in a year or 2 years or longer, and maybe building talent pools and trying to engage with those people early on. Because, I always say, one of the things is about having relationships with candidates and talent pooling with people who are not right now, but they could be right in a year or 3 years, or even further out than that, 5 years potentially. Is that an element of your role where you're sort of looking strategically at the business, what needs you might envisage in the next few years, and then going out and engaging with people early who you think, well, they could be a candidate, they could be right in a couple of years or 3 years or longer?
Definitely, and I think there's two bits there. So for me, one of the things that's really important is ensuring that every candidate has a really good experience. So one of the things that we want to do is to make sure that we kind of create advocates for MVF. So even if you're unsuccessful, you are still talking about MVF in a
Mm.
favourable light. And we have people that are rejected for a job that might come back in a year, 2 years, 3 years, because they remember, how we made them felt throughout the interview process, the
Yeah.
feedback that we gave them, the kind of conversations that we had to add value to their experience, even though they were not successful for us at the time. So I think you can do that all the time without proactively going out and doing anything more. And I think a lot of companies forget that. And you see on LinkedIn everywhere people, saying, oh, I applied for a job, came in for 2 interviews, I haven't had a phone call for like 3 weeks, I'm assuming I'm rejected.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, though, it's just basic courtesy really to call people and give them the outcome. And ultimately, when you're interviewing someone, they've given up quite a lot of time to go through that process with you. And really, it's 15 minutes of the hiring team's time jotting down some feedback, and then it's 10 minutes of my time phoning them up and sharing it. Like it's not a big piece of work. I think every company should do it. I don't really think there's any excuse there, which I know might sound a bit harsh, but for us at MVF, like the thought of a candidate feeling like that is horrible, and we shouldn't let people feel like that. You're not going to be an advocate for us if we treat you bad. And second of all, in terms of kind of like the pipelining piece, it's definitely something that we do and we could do more of. And I think when you're in a smaller business, it can often be harder, because when we look at the roles that we have, there are some that come about due to growth. So there's a few things we're talking about at the moment where we sort of anticipate that probably in about 6 months, we're going to need some senior people in this area.
Yeah.
But we're typically hiring at the moment more at the kind of graduate and entry level kind of place. And I think for those kind of candidates, there's a couple of things that you can do. So one is around thinking around how you kind of create value for them. So is it around feedback for their CV? Is it around, I don't know, feedback on kind of interviews? And we, as part of our networks, we've gone into some schools and colleges. We also kind of partner with an organisation that does kind of interview skills at school. So we do it kind of more at the softer side.
Okay.
And I think it's also around kind of getting your name out there as much as possible. And I think that's where for us, we try and participate in things like this that people might watch and glean something from. We also work with a number of universities where we'll provide kind of, whether it's materials or interviews to kind of help students at that point. So I think you can be really creative in what you do. And ultimately, if you kind of put yourself out there and ask, you can kind of make things happen. And don't get me wrong, we also do kind of use the LinkedIn approach. But to be honest, I think that it's something that everybody else is doing. And I think that a lot of people get a bit sick of it. Like I know my partner will say like, oh, I've had a recruiter contact me about a role that's at a lower level at an organisation that isn't as good as the one that I'm working at the moment. And I think that's where for us, when we do those LinkedIn approaches, we make sure it's really bespoke and relevant. Like we'd much rather contact 25 people on LinkedIn than 100 people if those 25 people are actually going to be useful and relevant, and they're going to understand why we're starting a dialogue with them rather than it just being like random spam. Also, a lot of our kind of senior, I guess, kind of leaders across the business will often attend events, participate in talks. And I think a lot of that kind of softer approach can be more effective. I think the bigger challenge, though, is that it's less measurable often. Because if you're thinking you were a student and you heard a talk in your second year from somebody at MVF, and then you apply for MVF in 2 or 3 years, you probably don't remember that talk that you went to. It's probably somewhere deep in your subconscious.
Yeah.
So when you apply, it's not like you've got on your ATS system, oh, this came from like a LinkedIn headhunt, or, it didn't come from this particular event, which I think is why it's quite challenging to get kind of sign off or budget for. So often we're looking at it from a wider MVF kind of profile raising, rather than necessarily it being, we're paying money to attend this event because we hope we're going to get 3 hires out of it. So I think sometimes you have to do the right thing for the business, and think about it long term rather than short term, because I think it takes a long time to reap the benefits of some of that more kind of informed and I guess kind of value add sort of prospecting rather than necessarily sort of prospecting on LinkedIn or in other kind of channels.
Sure. Okay. And if we were to sort of move on and look at, I know, we're in 2020. It's been an unusual year, to say the least. And we know, unfortunately, lots of people are now looking for work, having been made redundant, or they're facing redundancy at the moment. What advice would you have for people who are in that position, at any stage of their career, in terms of things they can do proactively to sort of get out there and get back into the market again and find opportunities?
There's a couple of things. So it's a very privileged kind of position to be in. So I know this won't be applicable for everybody. Some people just need to get a job and they need to pay the bills. But I think if you've got the time or kind of like a bit of a cushion, that means that you don't have to worry about taking the first thing. It's really prudent to spend time kind of looking at the market in terms of companies that you think would be a good fit for you. And then once you've kind of mapped those out, then it's up to you to kind of think about the best way to approach. So, for example, a lot of companies at the moment are just kind of putting like a talent pool advert up or a job on their website rather, as opposed to a role that you can submit your CV to. So I think that's something that you can do, although that's probably more of a long term rather than a short term win. Yeah. Similarly, if you've got the that kind of list of companies that you think could be a good fit for you, go on their careers page, see if they've got anything that could be relevant, see if there's anything in terms of transferable skills and apply. I also think as well, there's loads of networks you can be part of. And this is something at MVF that we do as a talent team. So if you think about the world of talent, there are loads of kind of meetup groups. Now, obviously, I know meetups aren't happening face to face at the moment, but there's still a lot of great content being kind of created there. There's then things like Inhouse Recruitment. There's kind of like agile HR groups, all these different things that are kind of happening that would be relevant to kind of the talent space. And depending on what you're looking for, I'm sure there are loads of meetups and kind of industry bodies that would be really relevant too. I think it's a bit of a win-win there, because you're going to kind of be engaging with content that's being created by people that know what they're doing. So hopefully you'll learn something, but also then you often get lists of kind of the delegates who are attending, or you have conversations with people. And I think it's that kind of more organic approach that can sometimes be really helpful too. And you might find businesses that you've never ever heard of or didn't realize existed. So it can really kind of help increase your knowledge.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think networking and sort of putting yourself out there is just so vital. And I guess what we always say to candidates in Career Propeller is you need to avoid being what we call a faceless CV, which sounds a bit cold, but it's the reality. I mean, you've got a background in recruitment. I used to work in recruitment. You get very little time to scan a CV in a busy day. That probably applies maybe more to agency recruitment than internal potentially. But it's that, I always try and get candidates to understand that recruiters are busy. They need to see something in a CV that's going to catch their eye. But if they're known to you, if you're known to them, then you're over a hurdle already, because you're someone who's known to them. Maybe you met them at, as you say, at a networking event, be that in face-to-face or online, or you dropped them a message on LinkedIn previously to introduce yourself. Little things like that make a big difference. And on the subject of CVs, what would you say? What makes a good CV? What would stand out to you? I know you recruit for lots of different roles, but what is there in a CV that someone can do so they might stand out from the crowd?
I think there's a few things here. Now, one of them is really basic, but I'm going to share it because you will be amazed how many CVs we get that are like this. So tailoring your CV to a specific job is a really, really good idea. But when you send your CV, make sure you're sending the right one. So we will often get CVs that have said, I'm looking for this job at this company, whereas you've applied for us for something completely different.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, there are times when you know, will be able to convince a hiring manager that applying for lots of jobs is quite stressful and it's easy to make mistakes. However, the challenge from those hiring managers is often, you know, this is a role where we need attention to detail. And if your job search is important, which it is, you should have, you know, taken that little bit of extra time. So I know that is a really basic one, but I would definitely recommend double, triple checking everything that you're sending to make sure it's right, because that happens more often than you would believe. And also, I'm not just talking about like entry-level candidates here, it can be across the board. Because I think some people just go, I'm going to apply for 10 jobs today and just sort of work through it really quickly and don't take that time.
Yeah.
I think also as well, just having a look at the job description and seeing if there are particular areas that are highlighted that you have experience in. So I think whenever you're writing your own CV, you make a bit of an assumption that people know what you're talking about because it's so familiar to you, it's your day to day. And even if you get like a friend or a colleague to read through your CV, they're often in the same position because they hear about you talking about it all the time. They sort of know what you do. So I always think if there are things that are on the job description or the advert that are really explicit and you have those that experience, do point it out. Because if you don't point it out, that person won't know. So I think that's really kind of important. And also for MVF in particular, we also hire based on our values. So a company might not put its values in its job descriptions. We do, but some people don't. So definitely have a look at the website of the company that you're looking for to double check those values. First of all, to make sure you're aligned, because if you're not aligned, it's probably not going to be the right role for you.
Yep.
And second of all, I think it's also really important just to make sure that you're including those values. So for example, at MVF, when you look at our values, we want people that are working kind of as a team, looking at data, looking at iterations, you know, and doing it in the right way through kind of working as a team and helping others. Now, an application that might be right for us might not be right for some of our competitors, even for the same job. Because if that's not how they work, if you write a CV for our values and send it to someone else with ones that are opposite, it's just not going to be a good fit.
Yeah.
So I always think do that little bit of research, you know, that half an hour of researching and editing can really make all of the difference.
Yeah, I'd echo that for sure. I think, you know, one of the things we see on the big job boards now is the immediate apply or one-click apply button. And that's good for the job boards because they can sort of up the number of applications that a company is getting, but it really goes against candidates, I think. I mean, you know, because typically what happens is one-click apply means that you're using the same CV for every opportunity. And as you said, I could go out and apply for 10 jobs today and fire out the same CV to those 10 jobs without any tailoring. I mean, I always recommend having a sort of a living paragraph at the top of a CV, which is sort of it's like an elevator pitch, like a little profile. You can write that differently for every job you apply for. And because, you know, typically people have had a lot of different experience, especially if they've moved from industry to industry. But as you say, if you're applying for one specific role, you can definitely tailor your CV more for that, and working off the job spec as well. I always say again that you know the job spec is it's really a list of requirements. They're sort of telling you what they want, and not to look at that and think, does my CV reflect that? Yeah, you're sort of you're basically setting yourself up to fail. And unfortunately, what happens is people get quite despondent because you might send out 30 CVs and you get nothing. Well, you know, did you really go through the process of looking in depth at what the job spec was saying, looking, as you say, at the company website and the values and what the company stands for? And have you shown that you're that type of candidate? And if you can't really say, yes, I did all that, then you can't really complain that you didn't get called in for interview or, you know, or
Definitely. And for us as well, like we really like to see like the detail and the examples on CVs. So, you know, if I was thinking about my CV, I'd be talking about like the number of hires that I made, the time to hire, the speed to hire, and actually kind of giving the metrics.
Yes.
Whereas I think a lot of people, when they're writing their CV, write it to kind of tell a story. And that is useful, but I think it's really important to give some of those kind of key metrics. So thinking about roles that we hire at MVF, like if we're looking at, say, a writer, we want to know what they've written, and for whom, and then also like the number of articles or pieces they were writing a week. Because if we've got someone that's used to writing, say, 1 article a month, that's not going to be a good match for us.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's someone that maybe was writing one like full user guide and it was like a 30-page document, that's quite different to what we do. But that person's obviously used to working at pace. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same. It's just about getting an idea of kind of how much you've done and you've delivered. And I think it can be really difficult when you're applying for a job, because it's really hard often to know exactly what level the position is. So my job, talent manager, can be such a wide-ranging position depending on the company that you're applying for. And it's the same for almost every kind of, job seeker out there. So I think by providing those numbers, the person that's reading that CV can see if you're aligned to what the expectation is in that organization. Whereas if I think around not sharing those details, people aren't going to know what you've done or what you've delivered. And that is just important as kind of the job title and the overview on the CV.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we've covered so much. We're nearly up to an hour. So first of all, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And, I think we've covered a lot, and I know that there'll be people out there who will have great benefit from watching this and picking up on the sort of tips that you've given. So thank you, Emily, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great to be here today.